everyone, Austin here with The Real Seal, back again for another FAQ video about discharge lines. To start off, what are discharge lines? Discharge lines are the PVC pipe that extends from your sump pump system out to the exterior of your home in order to discharge the water from underneath your floor. These discharge lines can come in many shapes and sizes. We're going to talk about the ones you will see. We'll also talk about the ones to avoid, and then we'll talk about alternatives to discharge lines as well. The first thing to note about your discharge line is if it's coming from your sump pump, it should be 1.5 inches PVC line here. This should extend all the way from the sump pump up and out of your home. You'll see it many times just going right into a brick wall or your foundation wall, or even over the top of the foundation through the siding so that it can discharge from the home. Once it exits out of there, it's going to 90 down into a freeze guard, which allows water to spray out in the case of your discharge line freezing. What happens if my discharge line freezes? The water will be able to escape from the freeze guard and still allow the pump to keep running without flooding your basement or burning the pump out while you get an opportunity to go clear that line. Some villages do not allow the freeze guard connection we have here. What they ask for is an air gap, and what an air gap will look like is this. It's just that pipe coming down is going to end with a few inches before the 90-degree 4-inch PVC. And that's just to allow, again, if any of the line were to freeze or clog, for the water to come up and out without burning out your pump or your system. From the freeze guard, your discharge line is going to extend underground with a Schedule 35 PVC pipe. It's green, it's a little thicker than the real thinner landscape pipes you see, and this allows for the big landscape mowers to run over it or anything you do so it doesn't crack this pipe, collapse it like a corrugated pipe would. Corrugated pipe for discharge line? No, never, never, never. We always want to use solid walled pipe so it doesn't collapse, and the corrugated one will also collect dirt that will clog the line eventually. Now this line will run underground, usually only about 1 foot. You don't need to bury these 3 feet underground because we're not trying to prevent them from freezing because they shouldn't be holding water all the time, unless your ground is super saturated, in which case, French drain. So this line could conceivably come out to your yard and tee off into a French drain. And that French drain then will spread typically 10 feet in either direction with the bed of gravel underneath these holes. This will help soak into the yard quicker, and it'll help to disperse that water better. Now, there are no guarantees about the dispersal of water in your yard. Nobody has control over the soil composition or of the saturation or of the water table. No contractor can change that. The only thing they can do is try to install different systems to try to move the water in a different way. Whether you go from the standard discharge or the French drain, and in what we call a discharge basin, which looks like this. This is a 6-inch standard discharge basin that will work for most single-family homes' discharge lines. There are 9x9, 12x12s that you can get that are larger to help handle more water as well, especially when French drain isn't an option or you just need some more capacity to handle the water. These will be installed level with the grass. Blends right in since it's green, and you can even pop it right off and clean it out. So the question, is my discharge line ever going to clog or fill up with material? It shouldn't, because it's just your sump pump line, but we all have kids, and they all like to put rocks, as I did when I was a kid, through the pipes that we find outside. So if that were to ever happen, you can just pop the lid off, come in, clean it out, and then you're on your way. Additionally, underneath this basin, we're going to install about a 2-foot bed of gravel. This will give us more surface area of dirt and soil to soak the water into. On the bottom of the basin, you'll see we drill holes to allow that water to drain down and to hopefully make sure it disperses beneath your lawn and doesn't cause any puddling. Some of you might ask, well, Austin, I've got this corrugated line and it's buried and it's working fine. Well, then why are you watching the video? As you can see, it's very easy to bend, to collapse. These ridges will gather debris, especially if you use these for gutter lines. Over time with the lawnmowers and your teenager driving the car on the grass, This will collapse and it'll need to get redone. We always strongly recommend replacing any corrugated buried lines with solid wall PVC. It is the best solution to use to ensure that that PVC and that line stays there so you don't have to keep digging it up year after year and replacing it. You'll also see sometimes where people have the 1.5 or 2-inch flexible hose that they just run across the top. That's going to have a very high chance of freezing in the winter. Also, it's not going to disperse the water very friendly, and it's going to cause a big mess in your yard. We always recommend burying and pushing the water away from the yard. Remember, you need to have at least 15 feet from the house to the yard, and most standard discharge lines are 20 feet. This prevents water from recirculating back into the home. Will this kind of work need a permit? So when we're doing discharge lines, typically a permit is not needed. However, if you're in the Chicagoland area and you're anywhere in Arlington Heights or Schaumburg, those villages and others do require permits for their discharge lines. The reason they do this is because the houses are really close together and the boards decided to vote that they didn't want to be flooding each other's houses. And they had a lot of people in the past throwing their lines all the way to their property line and just flooding their neighbor's yard. So for a lot of these villages, they have requirements and limits on how long you can extend a discharge line. Some villages only let you extend it 5 or 10 feet from the home, which is pretty disastrous as you're just going to circulate all that water. But other villages will allow you to discharge it to a reasonable way away from your home, but they have stipulations in place where it cannot be within 10 or 15 feet from a property line or a city sidewalk so that you don't flood the sidewalk and cause freezing in the winter. Now let's say that you have a yard that has all of the things we talked about and your yard still floods and you don't know what to do. One option, in the city of Chicago at least, you have to tie all your discharge lines right into the storm, right into the city sewer. And that's your sewer stack in your house because Chicago has combined storm and sewer lines all into one. And so you tie it in there, your yard's never flooding from that. And that's great. In other areas outside of Chicago that don't allow you to tie in the sewer system, you can tie into the storm system, which is separate out in the suburbs and around the country. And what this involves is digging the discharge line down under the sidewalk and through the easement to the street. And on the street, there can be a basin. Sometimes this storm grate, it's a big metal dome storm grate, is on your yard or your property, or maybe it's down the street a little bit. And we can run it to that line. We can tie the line straight into the storm basin, get a permit for that, absolutely. The village is going to want to inspect that. And then every bit of water that comes from your sump pump, you're never going to see outside. It's all going into the storm system. And that's really the best solution if you're able to, but most townships don't allow you to do it because they don't want everyone overwhelming the storm system. Why is this contractor asking for my plat of survey? For many permit applications, we have to draw the plans and the discharge line route on the plat of survey and turn it in to get approved for the permit. Most villages won't just go off a drawing that we make. They want to see the plat so they can see how far from those property lines that discharge line is going to be so they can approve or amend the permit. Obviously, we're going to be digging up your yard, and a big question that happens with that is, how's it going to look when we're done? Sometimes trees or bushes or landscaping needs to move out of the way in order for the discharge line to be installed. That's typically done by the homeowner, and then when they're done, the landscapers will come back and reinstall it. Obviously, we're going to have to cut the sod in the yard, but we do it very nicely where we cut it and we put it to the side, and then when we're done digging the trench, we put the sod back and remove the excess dirt so it's level with the existing yard. After a couple weeks, the seams fill right in with the grass and you can't even tell it's there. The only thing that you'll see is the top of that grate at the end of the line. It looks really good. Will there be pooling at the end of the line? There is always a risk that you will have pooling at the end of the line, just depending on how saturated the soil is, how much did it rain, what kind of soil composition do you have. At the end of the day, the best solution will be tying into the storm if you're not able to get rid of any pooling. And there are customers we've run into that have the swamps in the backyard. If you have that, you want to get a hold of a landscaper to do some yard drainage on a larger professional scale and get that tied into a storm drain, and the landscapers can get that approved through your village most of the time. Why is the discharge line not buried 3 feet beneath the ground past the frost line? That's where the sewers need to be. That's where the water main needs to be. Why not my discharge line? Well, your sewers and your water lines always have water in them. And they are required to be under so that they don't have to be dug up because the sewer pipe will burst, the water main will burst. And you don't want that happening. However, your discharge line is meant to be splash on grade when we're installing it standard at the surface. Meaning if we bury it 3 feet under, we're going to have to dig a dry well and bring that back up for a clean out. And yes, we can do this. Yes, it costs easily 10 times as much as a standard discharge line. It's not the best way to go. It's not the most economical way to go. And 99 out of 100 discharge lines are splash on grade out to the yard with no problem. And so you just need it buried right beneath the sod so that that water can flow, splash onto your yard, and down into the soil. And lastly, I'd like to address a couple of common discharge line problems you may see. The first and most obvious would be a freezing line. Typically in the winter, your sump pumps aren't running as much, so there's no water running through those lines because it's not raining, so your sump pump isn't gathering all of that. However, if you're in a high water table area and the village doesn't let you tie into the storm, and your only option is splash on grade, there's a possibility that that line could freeze if water pools at the end of the line. If that happens, you'll see the water come out of the freeze guard like I demonstrated earlier, and you'll need to go out there and try to free up that line somehow. We've seen people put those gutter warmers in the discharge lines where they know they have high water areas, and that helps keep the water from freezing. The other option that you could do is create a switch for the winter. And we've had to do this for a couple of different customers, and we'll do a T-switch on the inside, and when it comes to winter, they switch it, and that goes to a overground hose or a 4-inch line that they can just have run across the surface and disperse the water into their yard. This isn't the cleanest solution, but again, the winter, snow on the ground, that's the best place for it to go. Another problem that you could have with the discharge line is it could get clogged if you don't have proper filters on it. If you've got that grate and you don't open that grate up every once in a while to see, you could get dirt going through the grate. You could get your kids throwing marbles and stuff down there. That grate is very good for being able to clean the line out, and you will need to do that from time to time in order to ensure that that line runs clean. And then the last thing that can happen to a discharge line, mostly when it is a subpar corrugated or smaller discharge line, is it can clog and collapse, in which case it would need to get replaced. Those corrugated lines you cannot jet, they'll just rip it apart. Once it's clogged, it'll clog again. You want to replace the whole line with a solid PVC line that's going to last you for years. That's about all I got on discharge lines. If you have any questions about discharge lines, how they can tie into storm sewers, the permits involved, or any of the challenges you might face when installing or maintaining them afterwards, feel free to give us a call or cruise through our website and videos. We've got tons of information. We'd be happy to help you in any way we can. And always remember the real seal, where not everything's better when wet.